Hi, freight friends. Welcome to the Freight Trends podcast, where we explore the trends shaping the freight industry today and tomorrow. I'm Elliot, the co-founder of Freight Trends, here with my co-host Sierra. Today, we're very pleased to welcome Chadd Olesen, CEO of AVRL, to the show. Our conversation today will link with this week's newsletter focused on the impact of technology and automation in the transportation and brokerage space. AVRL, based out of Austin, Texas, describes itself as the world's most sophisticated platform for applying decision-making technology while being manageable by your non-technical workforce. Welcome, Chadd. I gave a very, very high-level summary of AVRL that I might have stolen from your company's LinkedIn page, but would you like to introduce yourself and AVRL to our viewers and listeners?
This might sound hilarious. I didn't know that was written on LinkedIn, and I'm on LinkedIn a lot, so I might have to go and review that. I'll give a quick background of AVRL just so that everyone has it. AVRL is leveraged by 3PLs and carriers and some shippers, actually, to automate processes that are disjointed. So in a world of transportation, supply chain, there's a lot of disparate systems. We were originally funded in 2017 by some really large VCs like SAP to come in and connect disparate systems. Randomly, I ended up meeting probably the largest intermodal company in about 2020. They had us come in and rip and replace all their robotic process automation. What we ended up doing was starting to focus on gaps that exist inside of transportation management systems so that I could connect a 3PL to a shipper system without APIs and then automate the execution between those systems. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, that's super cool. So what inspired you to start the company?
Super random. So AVRL, and Elliot, thank you for calling it AVRL. I know a lot of people call it AVRL. AVRL was originally founded as Advanced Voice Research Labs. And we wanted to be this old school Silicon Valley tech company. And we were focused on natural language processing at the time. So most people don't know that when you speak to, let's say, your Amazon Alexa or your Siri or something like that, there's microphones inside of those devices that measure pressure waves, and they turn those pressure waves into unstructured text. So in theory, when you're texting with somebody, the words that you're texting mean nothing to the machine. There's a process called natural language processing that converts unstructured data into structured data formats. That's what we specialized in. And we actually found AVRL in 2017 to build the in-car natural language processing system for this massive German auto manufacturer. What ended up happening was a really large company in Seattle tried to acquire us, and SAP ended up giving us money to connect disparate systems. Apparently, at that time, SAP was running a system called ECC6. This was before SAP HANA. And a lot of the ERP systems that, like a Walmart or a Home Depot or an Aldi would run are legacy, and they don't have the ability to expose APIs. But if you could grab the data, transform it, and hit another system, all of a sudden you could start to get those things to talk. We started working with a lot of the blue chip SAP customers, like massive oil and gas companies, massive transportation companies, on the shipper side. And one of them had me speak in Bentonville, and randomly JB Hunt got connected with us, and that was kind of off to the races. We actually didn't know what we were trying to solve when we were solving it. We basically went in to sell JB Hunt something. They looked at us and they were like, "This is great. Can you automate our spot bidding?" And we were like, "Well, that's way easier than what we were trying to do, so let's look at that." We were super successful at it, and I'll explain the reasons why in just a second, but they had success. And then we talked to another one, and they were running into the same challenge as another one. And then all of a sudden we were working with most of the top 23 and a lot of the larger carriers. And we had taken a larger group of transportation than we had maybe even imagined. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's definitely a common problem in our industry, right? It's everyone is sort of speaking a slightly different language. Maybe you would say a dissimilar dialects of the same language, right? And tying all these systems together is definitely a monumental challenge.
Yeah. The problem exists on even a much larger level than most people understand. You both work in transportation, in the trenches, and so you understand. And Elliot, you being in pricing, specifically, there are so many systems. Even when you look at just RFP, you've got Jagger, Scout, Coupa, right, Emerge, that is and what we see is that in evolutions of technology also becomes more fragmentation, right? So like
Yes.
like when we look at like appointment scheduling as an example, like P44 announced a couple weeks ago that they're going to now have a shipper product for appointment scheduling. Well, that's now another system that everyone has to worry about like automating or operating in. It's really interesting.
Yeah, don't even get me started on like RFP feedback, right? Like what is green, yellow, red mean, or 1, 2, 3, or any of the 50 different pieces of feedback you can get from those.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you're trying to make our lives easier, which is awesome. I'm here for it. What would you say that your mission and vision is for AVRL?
This is a really hard question. I think what we're really trying to do is bring really good tech into transportation. We tend to believe that the technology that exists and persists in transportation isn't like best in class. I don't think that a lot of the technology in transportation could live in any other industry. And I wanted to bring like real technologists in and hire people from in transportation to create like best in class technology. And that's like one thing. When I look at like our mission that we're really focused on is like, how do people then be really successful with really good technology? And what we've been focused on at AVRL over the past 8 months is like, if someone signs a contract with us, how do we make sure that they're successful? How do we make sure they understand how to review data? How do we make sure that they understand like what a data store is, what an API to that data store is, and then also how to use that as like a benefit to their organization? Is if you can automate the execution, you can start running really unique network strategies, right? So when you look at like pricing specifically, like how do we get better buying like LA to Vegas, Phoenix to Chicago, Chicago to Memphis? How do we drive cost to serve down? When you look at like traditional cradle to grave models, or you look at even split models, what ends up happening is the account teams are so focused on their own accounts or their own pods that they don't look up and see like, oh my gosh, maybe there's a backhaul lane that's like literally on my Kraft Heinz, like are on my Kraft Heinz spot market, and it's literally a correlated lane to something that we're running for Niagara or anyone else, right? And that doesn't happen in traditional 3PL. You go and you start looking at a lot of the larger 3PLs, maybe like even like NFI, they're literally looking at that matching and understanding like, hey, we can serve this lane super competitively that no one could even compete with us on. We want to build massive capacity and density here. And that's what we're trying to do from like a mission perspective is like, if you don't understand data, you don't understand how to review data, you don't understand how to connect systems together, like if you automate, it's not going to work the way that you want it to. And so it has to be like much more than just delivering automation.
Yes, you can still be sort of like lost and myopic even if you have automation processes running, right?
Yeah. And that was challenging for us when we first came in. I mean, my first 5 customers were in transportation. We're in the top 10. They were like the top 10 largest 3PLs in the world, and they have massive data science teams. They have massive analytics teams, massive pricing teams. And what we've had to do is like figure out like, as we go deeper into mid-market, like how do I make sure that some random trucking company can be just as successful with our technology as someone else? A lot of startups don't have that. They work from the bottom up. And that's been a unique challenge to us. I'm sure other startups have that all the time, that they run into a similar problem. It's just been really unique for me to experience personally.
With that sort of initial set of customers that were quite large and sophisticated, you would have sort of like internal technical expertise that could sort of like speak the same language with you and your teams, understand what was happening at least at a high level, and then communicate that back to members of their organization. Like, are you seeing the need to bring in like, or like for these sort of mid-market or maybe even smaller entities that you're doing business with, like, do they have the technical capacity in-house to like sort of speak that same language with you? Is that like a unique challenge, or are you navigating that pretty well?
So that was something that we foresaw like super early on. I'm going to give you the reason why I saw this. It had this demo and it was on some random public load board. Okay.
Yeah.
And I was going and I was pitching it to 3PLs, and they literally thought I was selling that load board. They didn't realize that like what I'm showing them is fully automated on the screen, and then it's like bidding and all this stuff. And they were like, yeah, well, we use like DAT and ITS. Like, I don't need this. And I'm like, what? Like, I don't understand how you don't understand this. And I was on this call with Convoy, like super early on. And someone called me after and they were like, hey, I used to work for CH. Like, this is stuff that we were like trying to do. Can I come and work for you? And we hired that person and he taught us a lot about transportation. We realized that there was like a massive need for us to hire transportation specialists. Since that time, like we've hired like a former assistant GM of pricing from Knight. We've hired a bunch of people that came from just the industry, like could have come from like a CH. And then what had happened recently, maybe in the last like 10 months, and this was like a huge monumental shift for us, JB Hunt bought BNSF, and JB Hunt didn't need the BNS automation team. They have their own.
Right.
We hired them, and they now come in and help our customers understand how to deploy robots, how to look at strategy, how to look at their data. And I always had this philosophy where I was never going to hire from one of my customers. Like that was just like not what we're going to do. Well, that's really challenging. Like when you're looking for like extremely talented people and you're working with like a lot of the top 50 3PLs, like where do you pull from? And we met Rebecca and she ran like a huge section of the BNSF automation team. And she's been on our team helping teach our customers like best in class strategies for onboarding, etc. We actually even use her in our sales process now to like talk about how much work it takes to deploy, how much like they need to think about this and this and this. And that has been a big shift for us, like structurally. Like if you worked with us, 3 years ago versus you working with us now, we are probably going to handhold like the entire thing for success.
Mm-hmm. That makes complete sense. So like, as you think about how you're positioned within this space, what is setting you apart from your competition in the space? Maybe there isn't like direct competition in this field. I think there's probably like at least indirect competition, right? Like what's the value prop for potential clients to go with AVRL compared to one of your competition?
Technology aside, we're a team of about 120 engineers. Like we're a massive engineering group, and I want to build like best in class technology. When we look at transportation, what a lot of people do is they dumb down the solution so that the broker can use it. We need to not do that as an industry. We need to elevate the education so that brokers and analysts and carrier reps can use really complex systems. And so like fundamentally, that is like our biggest like differentiator that we see from us to our competitors. On the technology side, a lot of people, when they look at automation on web, they use robotic process automation. We don't. We do full HTML manipulation. And so we think about the technology side completely different. And this is mostly just because we're a group of engineers. So we are definitely solving it different from a technology perspective, but it's a mindset that our group has of like, we want to help educate and give them complex tools, not dumb our tech down to meet them. I think that that's really important. Elliot, I don't know if you've like looked at like pricing models. Like I was with Scott Friesen at Echo a little while ago, and we were talking about the Monte Carlo model. And when all these 3PLs have like dialed in pricing, like 13 of them can work together. The 14th one, the winner of that load loses money completely. And so we need to like enhance our customers' ability to price freight or schedule freight, etc. We're trying to like almost bring like a strategy. Like when you work with AVRL, you're going to also work with the strategy of our tech, not just like implementing tech.
Do you think that, as we talk about the sort of like need for automation, I think for all of us on this call and many of our viewers and listeners, right, it's like, it's quite obvious that it's needed, a solution like AVRL, for example, but the time remaining to not go down this path seems to be shrinking before these entities are like left behind. Would you agree with that? I mean, how much time is there left to sort of like get on this train before you're completely left behind at the station?
I'm gonna use an example of like how much people are like about to be left behind.
Yeah.
If you work with WestRock and you don't have their API, you no longer have access to their spot freight. And unfortunately, they won't let any new carriers in. Like that is like a real thing that's happening right now. And we look at like, synchronous APIs versus asynchronous APIs, and one, the carrier grabs loads and pulls them down, and one, the shipper hits their systems. Like, people have shifted their routing guides like massively via API, and we meet with carriers all the time, or 3PLs all the time, and they're like, oh, that's a terrible account to automate. There's no volume. And we're like, oh my gosh, you don't even know where the volume is. Like, you're not even have access to it. And what I think that this challenge does, like with automation, if you looked at like automating appointment scheduling as an example, like, I think everyone looked at that as a cost reduction play at first, right? Like, if I automate my appointments, I can eliminate jobs. That is not how the best 3PLs and carriers are looking at that. They're looking at it from a lead time play, right? If I can secure a shipment, like I get tendered, I auto schedule. I just gave my carrier sales lead time like 1,500% more lead time for securing capacity. I'm going to get better rates in the market. I'm going to get the best picks. I'm going to get the best drops. So I think these shifts, while you might not experience them like at day, like today, in several, like, I don't even know it's going to take that long. 4 years, 5 years from now, the marketplace is going to be so much different. And I think that people massively probably underestimate how fast certain 3PLs and carriers are moving. We see this unique shift right now in the market where you've got 3PLs and carriers that are just like doubling down on tech. So, and they're not just like implementing it. They're also focused on the change management and how they need to restructure pay and restructure this and this and this. And you have these other 3PLs and carriers that are shedding technology to try and stay alive.
Right.
I think that creates this massive, like a super interesting shift. And then I also think the barrier to entry now is just so much harder to get in if you want to be like an entrant into the space.
Yeah, I mean, we have to remember brokers or even carriers, for example, that these automation processes are greatly desired by the shippers too, right? Like, to your point, if they can get pricing back via a synchronous API, why would they willingly spend all of the manual time to go through the process of manually getting these responses from you if you can't meet them where they are from a technological perspective, right? From a technology perspective.
I think that there are massive shifts that are going to happen on the shipper side that people aren't anticipating yet.
Yes.
The shipper is not behind on technology at all. They are running into the same hiring problems that everyone else did. The only thing that the shipper gets to do is they get to control who moves the freight and at what point. And so like when it makes sense for the shipper to consume a task back because they can automate it, they absolutely will. When they need to split something, they absolutely will. I was literally with a shipper, and what they have done is they have placed high volume in certain API, low volume in a certain API, a different set of volume in a portal. And now they're email quoting because they want different rates across the board. And they're literally going to put it where it makes sense for them, which means that now that shipper used to have a single portal. Now they have 4 ways that they're collecting rates. And if you are a 3PL or a carrier that supports them, you have to support all. And they monitor your activity. It's crazy.
Each one tells them something different, right? I mean, something I've seen in my world, is like now that shippers can kind of almost self-serve rates if they're connected via synchronous APIs, right? There are all of these interesting optimization things open up where characteristics of the loads in question are being tweaked to try to find the best set of load characteristics for the best price, right? It's there's all of this interesting stuff happening.
They get to also like test really easily, right? Like we had a big carrier get access to a massive retailer API. They let them run with it for a week, and they were like, "We're going to pause you because we're going to monitor your performance on these shipments that you won in the first week." Then after that, they will literally only tender them the volume on the lanes that they performed well on. It's insane. Like it's about to get really strategic from the shipper perspective. Much more than I believe people anticipate.
Yeah. So much experimentation can happen and is indeed already happening, right?
Yeah.
I do want to circle back to something you mentioned kind of earlier in our conversation about the education piece for people. And I'm not the first one to say this by any stretch of the imagination. This is a commonly held belief within our industry. As we bring in more and more automation, it's not that you're the grim reaper replacing people's jobs and getting rid of jobs, but rather, their jobs are transitioning from this sort of like low value add rote work to the things that humans are better at. The machines are better at computation, pattern recognition, speed. The humans are much better at creativity, managing relationships with other people. How have you found success with trying to, get people to buy into that fact and, not, for lack of a better way of putting it, scare the hell out of people as you come in, this automation entity and get that good buy-in from people on the floor?
That's a really hard question because I think it depends on the culture of the organization.
Sure.
There are certain 3PLs where we don't need to do anything, or certain carriers where their leadership goes in and puts like the right processes in place, etc.
Yeah.
There are 3PLs that we work with where we have to do like a lot larger of a lift. And we try and identify like wins, like super quick through data review, like, hey, and it might not be a pro win for everyone. They might have lost money on a shipment and we go and audit it, and it was one that the automation said don't bid on and someone manually bid on it, and we need to create like that separation between the two. I think that when you look at automated bidding, there's a really unique opportunity to move as much volume into contracted freight as possible. And so that's a big push for us on education of the data. Is like, hey, used to have this as an active award. You lost it in the last cycle, and now it's that shipper's number one lane on the spot market. You need to go and talk to them about that and move it off of the board. And I think that sometimes the 3PL, I think that they just need to be pointed in the right direction of how to identify the win, how to identify the strategy. They're smart, super smart people. They know what they're doing. I think it's just that sometimes the technology becomes intimidating. And if you get intimidated too much, you're like, I don't want to participate in this at all. And so I think that with us, we want to show them how to be successful to an extent. At the end of the day, I still need them to run their strategy.
Obviously you've run through those challenges and just exceeded expectations, but can you think of a challenge? I feel like I'm in a job interview right now. Tell me about when you ran into a challenge, but what is one challenge that you ran into that you had to overcome, if any, or are you just great and you've never?
No, there's so many.
Our industry is only challenges, right, Chadd?
This might sound arrogant from the technology side, building automation is easy. Implementing automation is easy. Change management is really hard. And change management with 3PLs is even harder. I would say that is a challenge that we are trying to remove barriers and barriers and barriers on a day-to-day basis, where I come in and I'm like, hey, I'm going to automate your track and trace communication with your driver. And the person who I have to work with to get all of the logic out is the person whose job is about to be impacted. That is a really, really difficult challenge that we are actively trying to solve. In theory, that person's job's not going away. In fact, they probably need 10 people in that role, and it's going to just be managing by exception and all this stuff. But I would say that change management in transportation is the hardest challenge that we run into on just a completely day-to-day basis. It could even be I just lost money outbound California, shut off the bots from bidding California. And we're like, what? You bid on a load that was picked in Victorville and you gave it an Ontario rate. That's not the same. Don't do that. And so we're just trying to educate with data. And I think I think that if we're going to win change management, it has to be introducing them to data, helping them understand data, helping them even understand basic tools that they use to every day. Do you know how your DAT rate comes across? It's because of this, this, and this. We really need to help them understand, because if you can understand it, then you can build tools to benchmark against it. I don't expect to build all the tools, but I do want to help give them the data that can make my tooling better, or then their experience with our tooling better.
As your products, your suite of products has grown and evolved, I'm sure initially, right, there was a huge push to sort of convert some of this domain expertise that's coming from your clients into the automation technology that you're using. Are you still seeing that as a big challenge? Are there disparate enough sort of like, domain expertise buckets that you're still having to do that, or basically, have you gotten enough domain expertise to the point where this thing can basically just run at this point?
I think a domain expertise that will be forever changing is going to be appointment scheduling. I think it's like one of the hardest entrants. I'm going to use an example. You could have had a great automation that was running on Monolay, and then they leave 4 kites and go to a new system, and you're like, okay, well, now they're going to create all new facilities. They're going to create it's going to shift a lot. And so with technology shifts, like, so does the domain expertise, right? Like,
Yep.
MercuryGate just came out with an API, and like they don't even know how they're going to authenticate it yet. Like they don't. Like, and now I got to figure out how they're going to do it, and then I got to teach all my customers how they're going to do it. The shipper will always shift to a new system, right? We saw it earlier this year. Maybe it was last year. Rich Products was on E2 Open. A lot of people bought Rich Products API on E2 Open. They left E2 Open to go to Transplace. Like, anyone who paid for that E2 Open subscription just lost all their money. And now you got to go connect into Uber Freight. And then Uber Freight is deprecating FAM and now moving to IRQ API. It's just like this constant evolution. I don't think it's possible for a lot of the 3PLs outside of like the top 40, 50, like, they don't have massive IT teams to figure this stuff out, build like sophisticated systems, build an API into Blue Yonder that responds within 3 seconds. Like, there's a lot of complexities in a lot of these things, and they're just forever shifting.
It sounds very anxiety inducing, which is logistics. But I'm going to change the subject because I don't want you to go into like a spiral right now or a panic attack. So talk about a success story. Like, let's talk about something that makes us happy and not challenges anymore. Sorry, I brought that up. But do you have like a success story? You don't have to mention customers at all. But do you have one that like comes to the top of your mind?
Yeah, I have like a bazillion of them. I mean, we have a really large carrier. We helped increase their net new shipment count by 300%. It's a big, massive feat. Like, that's a lot of volume. Also, like, we do data reviews all the time. So we see like the success of like our customers. I think that where we see the most fun is like, I tell someone like, hey, did you know that like you actually have access to this system? We literally we're working with a really large refrigerated carrier, and they told us that they had access to, I think it was like 18 spot ports. We went and reviewed it against like our system. They actually had 108. And that was a ton of volume that their account teams didn't even know that they weren't seeing on a regular basis. They didn't have access to it. We don't want to just come in, deploy technology and like take that as the win. Like, we want to continue to educate them on like how their shippers moving. One of the benefits of working with an organization like ours is like, if I'm doing a lot of like the configurations and automation for these like large 3PLs and carriers, like when I see something like Walmart rolls out a new API, I'll like go to my customer like, hey, you just be ready that this is coming. You need to be aware of it, and you need to contact Walmart and get on like Sprint. And a lot of these people, I think, I don't know if the shipper has like a lack of communication to the 3PL, or it's just not translated like in a certain like unique way. But I think that a lot of AEs don't know the shifts that the shipper are happening. I want to be the person for my customer, like, tells them those things.
Yeah. No more being caught flat-footed. That would be, that's the ideal, right?
Yeah.
Are there any upcoming partnerships that you're excited about?
Yes, but I can't talk about them.
Okay. Well,
we do.
Then I will just go into today's sponsor read.
Perfect transition.
Yeah, thanks, Chadd. Thanks for that.
So I actually do have a partnership that is going to be announced in September at an event, and nice. It's with a really, really large TMS, and it's going to shock a lot of people that this TMS is going to be pushing our technology as some of theirs. And I'm excited about that because in ERP world, like the SAP, the Oracle, they have had these things called business add-ins or bodies for forever, where you like bolt in a system into the ERP and it transforms data or maybe hits another system. For some reason in transportation, a lot of people have always been like, this doesn't exist. Let's build a new TMS. And I think that the future of TMS is not building a new TMS, not buying a new TMS. It's bolting these things into your TMS to make it fit your business like a glove. And it's something that we've been like talking to a lot of people about for a really long time. But to have like the support of a really large 3PL that's probably like the largest TMS for carriers to be like in relationship with us about go to market is really exciting.
I feel like that's what a lot of companies do, not just in transportation, where it's just like, this doesn't fit what we're looking for. Let's add this on, not how can we make this fit what we want it to do. We would like to take a quick break to thank the sponsor of today's podcast. Nobody. If you're interested in sponsoring Freight Trends, send an email to sponsorships@freight-trends.com. Okay, now back to our regularly scheduled entertainment. Elliot, do you have another question for Chadd?
Yeah, I wanted to just quickly pivot. We've talked a lot about, the technology side, the value add for the external entities that you're partnering with inside of AVRL, right? Like how would you describe your leadership style and the company culture there at AVRL?
I think my leadership style is probably going to surprise people if they follow me on LinkedIn. I want to give like my team members anything and everything that they can to do their job and do it well. I'm in constant communication with our customers' leadership because of challenges that my team runs into. And I think that sometimes people look at AVRL and it looks like the Chadd show. They have no idea that we have like 100 people like working behind the scenes. What we're trying to do is automate as many functions internally for ourselves as possible. And that might not necessarily be like super apparent from the outside in, but a big push for us in like running efficient and running lean and giving better like customer communication and customer success is like, I'm going to automate as much as possible so that I can spend as much time with my customers as possible. I think from my leadership team perspective, we have some really, really solid leaders. My CTO used to work in leverage finance for Citibank. For us, like we just want to deploy good technology. I think a lot of CEOs are like, we want to win. Like obviously we want to win, but for us, a win might be different than how other people think is a win. Like a win for me is when like a customer calls me and it's like, hey, thanks for telling me I need an analyst and this and this and this. That's like a win for us. I just think that we're like maybe focused on like, I don't care about like taking like the cake. I care about like actually like at the end of the day, like, do we move the needle?
I mean, if you provide value, right, people recognize that pretty quickly. It's pretty apparent.
It's been like my entire go-to-market strategy, right? Not advertising. And we don't ask for a lot of like help with our customers, but like I might sit down with a prospect. I'm like, hey, if you used to work with that person, like call them and ask them about us. Like, that's fine. I want to deliver like good service and good product so that we continue to get lifted with the market. And I think like, hopefully that keeps happening. It's been happening, but hopefully it keeps happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to share about AVRL that we haven't yet covered, or like any other plug that you want to do before we close out the episode today?
I'm hiring. When I look at like what we're trying to do, I'm constantly looking for like analysts who can come in and help our customers get better at deploying strategy. When I look at like we're currently building like our sales organization out, and that's not necessarily outbound sales. Like we're hiring people to come in and help manage customer relationships. Like we really want to, we almost like feel like we need to give carriers and 3PLs the same level of service that they give the shipper. And if the 3PL and carrier believes that the shipper gets value out of being like the 3PL and carrier being present in front of them, like we want to match that same exact energy. And we might end up running AVRL like much different than like a traditional tech company. But I think what we're going to try and do is like match how the 3PL and carrier services the shipper in the same fashion, if that makes sense.
100%.
Yeah. Speaking of traditional tech company. Do you have any advice for aspiring entrepreneurs looking to break into the tech industry or specifically freight tech?
Don't do it. No. One of the things that I like really wish someone would have told me when I first started AVRL, like I think I was caught up in like the media of like, I want to run it, like build a startup and I'm going to sell it for like a ton of money and like all this. You like have to build like a real company. And I think that that's something like people need to be aware of and thoughtful of is like, if you're going to attack a problem, you probably need to care about that problem is as much, if not more than the customer. You probably need to like be willing to like go in all in on it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if a lot of people who start businesses realize they have to build a real business. Like it's not as much about like building a startup. It's like you got to build something, and startups by default are dead. So like you're going to build something that has to come to life. And I think that it's a lot more challenging than people expect. And I like if you ever like if someone is like listening to this and wants to start a business, I'd always like love to give like thought or opinion or encouragement, because it's like it's pretty lonely.
A lot of people are either watching this or listening to this, and if they maybe haven't heard of AVRL before, or they didn't have a full understanding of what the value proposition was that you guys are presenting, they're probably quite intrigued and want to get in touch with you. How can they get in touch with you or learn more about your company and what you do if they have additional questions?
If you email like contact@avrl.io, I guarantee it'll hit my desk. And then also LinkedIn, I think is a good place to find us as well.
Nice.
Great. Well, Chadd, thank you. Before I close us out, I just want to say thank you. I learned a lot. I know that our listeners learned a lot. Elliot is already very knowledgeable, so he may not have learned anything, but
I learned a lot. This was fun. This was a lot of fun. It's always fun to have these conversations.
Thank y'all very much.
It was a pleasure speaking to you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for listening or watching this episode today. We're so thankful for Chadd Olesen, CEO of AVRL, joining us. If any part of today's conversation sparked your interest, check out avrl.io. Please be sure to follow Freight Trends on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, and or X so you don't miss anything. If you haven't yet subscribed to our newsletter, go to freight-trends.com. Catch us in the next episode and let us know who you'd like to see in future episodes by emailing info@freight-trends.com or sending us a DM to our social media pages. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.